Toronto's skyline is exploding, but not in the way you might expect. You see, when most people think of an exploding skyline, they picture one place, one core, one cluster of towers that just keeps getting taller. New York, Chicago, Dubai. The center grows and everything else follows it outward. That is how cities are supposed to work. But when you look at Toronto, something is immediately off. The city does not have one skyline, it has three. A cluster downtown at the lake, another rising at Yonge and Eglinton a few miles north, and a third at North York Center, a few miles beyond that. Each one separated from the next by what looks like a continuous carpet of detached houses stretching in every direction, three separate clusters of towers on one transit line rising out of a city that looks, for most of its surface area, exactly like the suburbs of anywhere. And here is the strange part. The reason those three skylines exist in exactly those locations and nowhere else across a city of nearly 3 million people is not ambition or geography or economics. It is a zoning designation called the Yellowbelt, a planning rule that covers approximately 70% of Toronto's residential land and prohibits almost all of it from ever building anything taller than a detached house. The Yellowbelt did not create Toronto's skyline. It created the conditions that forced the skyline to concentrate into three narrow corridors and nowhere else. Once you see that, the entire city suddenly makes sense in a way it probably did not before. The Yellowbelt is the name urban planner Gil Meslin gave to the enormous swaths of Toronto designated as protected low-rise neighborhoods in the city's official plan. On the plan's map, these areas appear in yellow. They cover approximately 70% of Toronto's residential land. The Yellowbelt is roughly 1.8 times larger than every other residential zone in the city combined. In these neighborhoods, you can demolish a post-war bungalow and build a multi-million-dollar single-family home in its place. You cannot legally build a duplex. You cannot build a triplex. You cannot build anything that houses more than one family unless the building predates the zoning and has been grandfathered in from an earlier era. In the neighborhoods covering the majority of Toronto's land area, a homeowner can spend $2 million building a single house, and that is considered appropriate development. A builder who wants to put up a small apartment building that would house 10 families is not permitted to do so on most of that land. The zoning does not distinguish between wealthy, single-family homes and modest ones. It simply prohibits density. The entire system was designed to keep these neighborhoods exactly as they were. It was built in the same era as the Spadina Expressway fight, the same years when Toronto was making a series of decisions about what kind of city it would become. For about 50 years, the Yellowbelt side of those decisions worked exactly as intended, which means that all of Toronto's growth, all of it, had to go somewhere else. It could not spread gently across the residential fabric the way most cities absorb new residents. It had to concentrate, and where it concentrated is why three skylines exist. Downtown became Toronto's first skyline for the most traditional reason possible. It was already the economic anchor. Union Station was the rail hub. Lake Ontario was the shipping edge. When the subway opened in 1954, it simply reinforced what was already there. Commerce needed a place to stack itself, and downtown was that place. But downtown could not keep spreading. North of Bloor Street sits some of the city's most protected and politically powerful residential territory. For decades, those neighborhoods successfully fought every attempt to build towers near them. Downtown kept climbing. It could not expand outward. The skyline rose and then stopped at a hard edge, like a city that ran into an invisible wall. That wall is the reason Midtown exists. Yonge and Eglinton became a skyline because of something much less glamorous than ambition or architecture. From 1954 until the early 1970s, the subway terminated at Eglinton. Every morning, buses from the northern suburbs poured commuters into that one intersection, forcing thousands of people to transfer there daily. Developers noticed a permanent stream of foot traffic and did what developers do when they notice a permanent stream of foot traffic. By the time the subway eventually extended farther north, Yonge and Eglinton was already functioning like a mini downtown. Towers followed, and the same dynamic that produced them also shaped them. The wealthy neighborhoods immediately surrounding the intersection refused to absorb any of the density themselves, so the city concentrated everything at the intersection and kept the surrounding streets frozen. The Midtown skyline is essentially a pressure valve, taking in growth that the nearby neighborhoods simply would not accept. North York Center, the third Skyline, is the most deliberately manufactured of the three. Before Toronto amalgamated its surrounding boroughs in 1998, North York was its own city. Its leaders did not want to remain a bedroom suburb that existed only to export workers downtown. They wanted jobs and tax revenue to stay local. So they designed a downtown by force, a narrow strip of permitted high-rise development along Yonge Street between Shepherd and Finch, with direct access to Highway 401 and eventual subway service. The towers were allowed inside that corridor and stopped abruptly at its edges because the neighborhoods to the east and west stayed protected. A city within a city squeezed into a single line, built not because the market demanded it there specifically, but because the political will demanded it there and nowhere else was available. Three skylines, three different causes, one common thread. In each case, the Yellowbelt surrounding these nodes forced all available density into narrow corridors, and those corridors exploded upward because that was the only direction the zoning would permit. The subway line connecting them is the only reason the arrangement holds together. The three skylines only function because of what runs beneath them. The TTC, Toronto's transit system, carried approximately 420 million trips in 2024, making it the third busiest transit system in North America behind New York and Mexico City. About 25% of Toronto commuters use public transit, the second highest rate among all Canadian and US cities. This is genuinely remarkable for a city with the suburban footprint Toronto has. People who live in one skyline cluster commute to another without a second thought, which is the only arrangement that makes a city shaped like this actually work. What makes this less reassuring than it sounds is how the system is funded. Riders cover approximately 70% of TTC operating costs, one of the highest farebox recovery ratios of any major transit system in the world. Most comparable systems rely heavily on government subsidy. Toronto relies on the riders. When ridership falls, the budget falls with it. Service weakens. More people consider driving. And in a city whose roads between transit nodes were never designed to absorb a large shift to cars, that feedback loop tightens fast. Drivers in Toronto lost an average of 100 hours to congestion in 2025, already among the worst figures globally. The three skyline design requires transit running reliably at high capacity. What Toronto has is transit running at high capacity under a funding model that makes sustained reliability increasingly difficult. It is the kind of arrangement that works well until it does not, and then has no obvious backstop. Toronto's towers were not built by people who needed homes. They were built by investors who needed returns. The model worked like this. Developers offered condo units for pre-sale before construction began. Investors bought large shares of those units as financial instruments, betting on appreciation. The pre-sale revenue financed construction. Towers went up, the skyline grew. As long as capital was cheap and prices kept rising, the machine ran smoothly. Then interest rates climbed in 2022 and 2023. Carrying costs on investor-held units jumped. The pre-construction market stopped absorbing inventory. In the first 10 months of 2025, only 714 new condos were sold in Toronto, down 86% from 2023. Just 2,540 new condo units broke ground through September 2025, the lowest number since at least 1998. The cranes that had made Toronto's skyline famous went quiet. The consequence of this freeze will not arrive immediately. Condo projects take 3 to 5 years from groundbreaking to completion. The buildings that should deliver homes in 2027 and 2028 needed to start construction in 2024 and 2025. They did not start. Toronto is heading toward a supply cliff at exactly the moment the Yellowbelt most severely limits alternative paths to housing production. The city cannot easily build low-rise density across the suburban fabric because until very recently the zoning prohibited it. The investors who financed the towers are gone, the pipeline is empty, and the benchmark home price, despite falling to around 942,000 Canadian dollars in late 2025, still requires a typical household to spend roughly 2/3 of pre-tax income on housing costs. Prices fell and affordability somehow got worse. The math has genuinely not returned to earth. The city's response to all of this arrived in June 2025. Toronto passed citywide sixplex zoning. Any homeowner in any residential neighborhood, including Yellowbelt neighborhoods, can now legally build a building of up to 6 units on a single lot. This is the most significant reform to the Yellowbelt in the city's planning history. It is the kind of change that planners had been calling for since Gil Meslin coined the term and pointed out that in these protected areas, you could legally build a mansion but not a duplex. The absurdity of that arrangement is now, at least on paper, addressed. Whether it produces housing fast enough to matter is a different question. Gentle density takes time to proliferate across a built environment. Builders need financing. Financing requires viable income projections. The market is not currently offering those. Montreal's comparative affordability, often held up as the model Toronto should have followed, was achieved over decades through a culture of duplexes, triplexes, and walk-up apartments that now account for 58% of Montreal's total housing stock. Toronto is trying to introduce that culture into a city where it was actively prohibited for most of the past 50 years. The Spadina Expressway cancellation in 1971 chose transit over highways and produced everything good about how Toronto moves. The Yellowbelt chose neighborhood protection over density and produced the housing crisis. Both decisions came from the same political moment. Both are visible in the same skyline. The supply cliff of 2027 and 2028 arrives faster than sixplex zoning can fill it, and the city is discovering that 50 years of protected low-rise is not something you reverse in 18 months. Toronto built 3 downtowns because it deliberately protected everywhere else. The neighborhoods that make up the Yellowbelt fought for that protection and won it, and they won it repeatedly across 50 years of planning battles. The towers at Yonge and Eglinton and North York Centre are the logical output of that success. All the growth that could not go into the surrounding streets went up at the transit nodes in the only places the zoning would allow it. The result, a city with one of the most dramatic transit-oriented skylines in the world and one of the worst housing affordability crises in the world, both produced by the exact same decision. The 3 skylines are still there, visible from the lake on a clear day. The cranes that built them have largely stopped. The Yellowbelt that shaped them is being reformed for the first time in a generation. And the transit system that connects the 3 clusters is running at or near capacity, funded primarily by riders rather than government, which means every dip in ridership puts the whole arrangement under pressure. Toronto built something genuinely unusual. Whether it can sustain what it built, and whether the reforms arriving now came early enough to matter is the question the skyline is still asking.